Hello. So today we're going to just go over some setting up of SQL Reporting Services reports for Microsoft Dynamics GP, the security for it, and just some tips on, getting it deployed the most efficient way, and maybe it'll help, answer some questions that users have every now and then when they're trying to deploy these. So the first thing, I'm currently using Dynamics GP 18.4 on SQL Server 2019. I have reporting services already configured. If you don't, you'll want to get that configured first, so you can get to the reports site that we're going to be deploying the SSRS reports to. If you're going to be deploying to SharePoint, this video is not going to cover that. Um, if you're deploying to a report library for SharePoint, that's going to be a completely different setup. This is just a native deployment of SQL reporting services from Dynamics GP for SRS 2019. So as you can see, I have it deployed. I can get to the report site in the background. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into the SQL reporting services folders, and in the report server folder, there's a web config file which I have open here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this max request length equals 2690. It won't be there by default in most cases. If it is, that's perfect. You can just leave it. But you'll want to add that. Otherwise, when we're deploying in Dynamics GP, you're going to get a timeout error right away. So you're better off just going and getting this set up first. So this is just in the web config file for SRS. Starting with SQL 2017, the SQL Server Reporting Services is a separate install from SQL Server. So it'll have its own folder. You can see that I'm under C drive program files, Microsoft SQL Server Reporting Services, instead of underneath the main SQL Server folder. Again, that's SQL 2017 and 19. I'm using 2019. So here I'm just adding this max request length equals 2690, and then I'm just going to save the changes here. And that's all we really need for that folder there. And again, as you can see in the background here, I have the SQL Reporting Services site already up and running. There's three different areas that we need to set up security in order to be able to deploy the SRS reports and then be able to access the reports and run them. The first one is if you click on this little settings window here, there's a site settings and then there's security. By default, there'll be this built-in administrators. And if you're logged on as administrator, that might be perfect for you. I've seen some cases where being underneath a group, it didn't give us the permissions we needed. So what we did is we just clicked on this add user group. I'm going to select a system administrator, and then I'm just going to put in, I'm logged in as the main admin account, which normally I'll probably have enough permissions, but this is just for our purposes here. I'm just showing how to set this up. And then we hit OK, and then you can see it added my user as a system administrator there. Going back to the home page, so this is piece one of the three security settings for reporting services for Dynamics GP. Going back to the home page, then I want to click on this Manage Folder. And again, you can see built-in administrators are set up as the highest role is the Content Manager. For my purposes, I'm just going to click on Add again, and I'm just going to select all of these. And I'm going to put in my same account. And click OK. And as you can see in this case here, where the other one was just a system administrator or a system user, which gives access to the site, the folder permissions just give users access to what exactly they're going to be doing with the reporting services. So if they're just going to be like a looking at reports, the browser might be enough for them. If they're going to be publishing reports, publisher, report builder. If they're going to be creating reports, content manager is kind of the overall administrator of the SRS reports. So as far as permissions for SRS, this is the two permissions that you need. The third one is just going to be the RPT database roles underneath the Dynamics GP databases themselves, and those are what give users access to the data that the SRS reports pull, and we'll talk about that here in a sec. So in this case here, I have my permissions and everything's good there, so I just go back to the home and I can leave that. And then what I want to do now is I'm going to go to my Microsoft Dynamics GP, and I'm logged in as SA already. So then I'm going to go underneath the reporting tools setup. And in this window, I'm underneath reporting services. So for the report server mode, I can choose either native, which is the installing onto the site that we're going to be installing onto, or again, as I mentioned, if you're deploying to a report library for SharePoint, you can choose that option. We're not going to talk about that in this video, but we're just going to do the native. So then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in the site that I have my reporting service set up to. And it's just using port 80, so I don't need to put in the port number. And then I'm going to leave everything else. You can see it's already got D18.4 is my system database. Obviously, yours might be different. I don't need to change the use Windows authentication, anything like that for right now. So by default here, I'm going to click on, I only have Fabricam, my sample company, and you can see I don't have any options here. They're all basically blocked. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to click to deploy reports. And then you're going to get a little message here that says, changes have been made. Do you need to save these? We click on yes. Let that process for a little bit. All right, then once it gets done processing, you can see it just kind of bundled everything back up again. So then I'm going to go back here and I'm going to expand. I'm going to expand Fabricam again, my company database. And then you can see now I have the option to deploy my SRS reports. If you have more than one company, you'll see, more than just the Fabricam Inc., and you'd have those options. If I was deploying Excel reports or anything else, those options might be, um, marked. And if I already have Excel reports or SRS reports already deployed, I might see a green check mark next to those. If I'm redeploying the SRS reports, I would want to, and I have a green check mark here already showing that they've been deployed. I would want to just mark this option to redeploy the reports. But in this case here, I don't have any reports in that site yet. So I don't have to mark that option. I'm marking SRS reports I want to be deployed, and I'm going to click on deploy reports. And once I do that, you can see that it brings up the little progress bar there. I'm only doing the SRS reports right now. I'm not doing Excel reports, so that progress bar is not moving. And if you didn't put the max request length line or part timeout or timing or whatever the piece of information is in the web config file for SRS reports, it would bomb out about right at this point in the progress bar, and it would give you a message pretty much saying the exact same thing, that you need to put the max request length equals 20690 in the web config file. And that's a common message. If you searched on it online, you'd be able to find it as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to let these reports deploy. What it's doing is it's deploying to the site that I pointed it to, and it's putting both the report files, which are just a standard RDL file, which is what the extension is if you were to create a custom SRS report. And it's just creating those, and then it's just putting the data connections pointing back to my Dynamics GP databases. By default, SRS uses Windows authentication, meaning it's not giving the permissions to the reports to your GP logins. It's giving it actually to your Windows accounts. So again, if you want a users other than the account that I'm using to deploy, the reports with, if I want to give other users access to these SRS reports, whether it be, outside of Dynamics GP or from within the Dynamics GP application, then I would go ahead and I have to add them to those two areas that we looked at earlier in the video, and then also the RPT database roles. And while this is processing, I can bring up the SQL Server Management Studio. And in my case here, I have all of the features installed for Dynamics GP. So when we get to the site where we look at the reports, you'll see that there's um, other report types, just such as, like project, some of the additional features that you can install with Dynamics GP. Obviously, if you don't have those deployed, you won't, or installed on your application, we won't have the reports deployed. You'll just have the standard, sales, inventory, financial, purchasing, things like that. And that's done. And if we wanted to look at it, we could just expand our company again. And now you can see there's a green check mark next to SRS reports because I have it deployed for Fabricam. In this case here, we're done with hitting or deploying part. So then I'm going to go back to my SRS page here, and I'm just going to hit refresh. And now you can see I have D184, which is my system database. If I double click on that, now you can see I have a whole bunch of different folders: the report models, data sources, multi-company. My one company that I have, my sample company, is T18 Forest. That's why you see that here. And if I dig down in this is going to be kind of the main area where you're going to be running reports from. You can see I have the defaults, the financial, inventory, payroll, purchasing, things like that. I guess I don't have project accounting, or else I think there's project reports as well. But we got the standards here, so you can click on this, and then like trial balance detail, things like that we can look at. There's a whole bunch of different reports. There's some charts and KPIs that you can use with like Business Analyzer, Power BI, things like that. The other part of the three parts of the security for SRS reports I was going to mention is, since we give the permissions to the Windows accounts and not the GP logins, is I would want to come underneath here, and this is the account that I'm logged into the server with. Go in my properties here, and underneath user mapping, I have my system database and my company database. Underneath the GP databases, there's these RPT roles that you can see here, and they work very similar to how the security roles in Dynamics GP work. So for example, if you want a user that's only going to have access to the SRS reports that a accounting manager would have access to, you might want to just use the RPT accounting manager. Same with bookkeeper, HR administrator, things like that. And if you want the users to have access to all the SRS reports, there's this RPT power user here. And if you click on this, the RPT power user, and then I go back into the properties for that account, back to user mappings and that company database, you'll see that now all the RPT roles are marked for that user. So you don't have to manually, click on each one. So again, you can, be specific on which reports you want them to be able to use, or you can let them have access to all of them. Same with the system database up here. This is just more of a power user, payroll, HR administrator. If not the RPT power user, you'll want to have this RPT all user marked. For our case here, I'm just going to add the power user here. And then again, if I were to go back into the properties and user mapping, click on the system database, and now you can see I have all the RPT. So again, the three parts are either a system administrator or a system user for SRS site. And then underneath the folders and files themselves, they can be a content manager or just a browser, depending on what the users are actually going to be doing with the reports. And then again, the RPT database roles that are underneath the GP databases. This is what gives the users access to the actual data that those SRS reports are going to be pulling. Because normally, your Windows account doesn't have, like the GP users have Dyne Group assigned to them. Your Windows account normally wouldn't. So this is what makes the connection to the GP databases in order to, pull that data into the reports. So that's the three parts there. So now I could go into, like let's say trial balance, let that load up. And then there's some values that you need to put here, whether or not you want to do a history year. And then since I'm using a sample company, I have to use 2027 for my year. Sort by, I'm just going to sort the first one. Everything else looks like it's pretty good. And I click on view report, and you'll basically process the information. And well, not a lot of information, but you can see it pulls the report. So that's just kind of what an SRS report looks like. If I were to log out and log into Dynamics GP, which I can do here, you'll be able to run the SRS reports from within Microsoft Dynamics GP themselves. And we can look at that real quick on this video. Again, I'm using Dynamics 18.4 on a SQL 2019 environment. And there's not really any permissions that you need to set up in order for users to see the reporting services reports from within Dynamics GP. Now the links will be there, however, depending on what they have access to as far as reports, that might be different. So for example here, I'm logged in again as my account that I did the install with, and I have access to all the reports. So I come underneath the financial area page, for example, and I have this reporting services reports. So in this case here, it's just going to pull the financial SRS reports since I'm underneath the financial area page. Same with sales, purchasing. Now, if I go underneath administrator area page, like you can see, I have all the SRS reports that are just the financial, and these are just for my sample company. If I go underneath the administration and click on reporting service reports, it's going to give me all the reports. You can see I have sales, HR, financial, inventory, things like that. So again, let's just do, I don't know, let's do accounts due. I can click on that. I can click view, and it's just going to load up basically the browser page if I didn't already have it open. And then I'll just choose like customer ID, click on reports or view report, and you can see I see the information. So that's basically all it's doing. You can view it from within Dynamics GP, but it's actually going to pull up a browser window. And this is also going to impact sometimes like some of the navigation lists. Like in this case, if I click on accounts, before it brings up the navigation list, you can see over in the right hand side here, it'll also show the SRS reports that kind of correspond, like in this case, with the accounts list. It shows me this 115 different ones. So current balance account, just different informations that I can find here. The other way you can use the SRS reports is I could come underneath this, customize this page, and I could add this business analyzer section. And these are just all the SRS reports as well. So I could just choose a couple, like I'll just, click on a couple here and then hit OK, hit OK. And then you can see this is just basically going to show, this SRS reports. Again, being a sample company, I don't have a whole lot of information that these reports are pulling, but obviously in your production live system, those might be a little more handy for you to use. And that way you can just view information without having to dig down into it. Just go on your GP homepage and, look at the reports, or again, you can do the reports right in the, SRS site itself, so you don't even have to log into Dynamics GP. And it's also used for users that they may not have access to Dynamics GP, they may not have an account that logs in the GP, but again, because we signed the permissions to their Windows account, They're basically ready to go as far as they can, get access to the SRS reports as long as you give them, the two permissions on the site and then there's RPT database rules. And that's basically deploying the SRS reports for Microsoft Dynamics GP. And there's three areas of security that you need for those. Hopefully that will answer some questions for everybody and allow you to deploy your reports without too many issues. Thank you.